12 years earlier, two baby gorillas were pulled from everything they knew and sent into the wild to live free. What almost no one expected was that one woman would spend over a decade trying to find her way back to them, deep into a jungle where the animals she once loved had grown into something far more dangerous. "We have to turn back. There's nothing here for us," Tany's father shouted after his daughter, who was already striding deeper into the forest. But Tany had reached a point where she no longer cared what anyone thought. From the moment she'd planned this trip, her father had tried to talk her out of it. Even the guide walking beside her had urged her to stop. It was her first time in this jungle, and he'd warned her that things had changed drastically in recent years. A troop of gorillas now lived deep within the forest, led by a new and far more aggressive leader. This alpha had turned violent to protect his family from the hunters and poachers who plagued the region. Years of encroachment had taught him one brutal lesson. Humans meant danger. He made no distinction between friend or foe. Anyone who came too close, no matter their intentions, was treated as a threat to be driven out. Despite her father's warnings and the guide's growing alarm, Tany refused to turn back. After months of searching, she and her father had discovered that one of the gorillas in this troop was Jalta, a friend from her childhood. He'd been taken from her when she was young, and she had never once stopped thinking about him. That was why she was here. Against every warning, she longed to see the creature who had once cared for her before she could even speak her own name. As doubt churned in her mind, something moved through the trees. The guide saw it too and quickly told everyone to stay alert. A deep, resonant roar tore through the forest, the first clear sign that they were not welcome. The group froze. Tany's father, Damen Aspinall, moved to her side. Shadows shifted in the dense foliage. Another roar ripped through the air, and Tany and Damen instinctively stepped back. The message was unmistakable. The gorillas were preparing to attack. Sensing the danger, the guide overruled Tany's wishes and insisted they retreat. As much as she longed to press forward, the risk to everyone was too great. Damen placed a steady hand on his daughter's shoulder. She hesitated, then accepted that this was as far as they could go. Just as she turned to leave, another bone-chilling roar stopped her cold. She'd spent enough of her life around animals to know exactly what that sound meant. The gorillas were furious, and they weren't going to let this group leave quietly. Tany turned back and froze. The massive gorillas had stepped out from the trees, closing in around the group with a menacing presence, their footsteps heavy against the jungle floor. One, larger and more intimidating than the rest, stood at the front, his eyes locked on hers. The intensity in his stare sent a chill straight through her. Every instinct told her to run. She had never faced anything like this before, and real fear finally settled in. The gorilla let out a low, threatening growl, baring his teeth in warning. They were standing on dangerous ground. Her heart pounded, but as she studied him, something familiar caught her eye. A distinct patch of brown hair on his head. It was Jalta, but this wasn't the gentle friend she remembered. He had grown into a powerful leader, hardened by the wild, and yet beneath the ferocity, Tany couldn't shake the feeling that her old friend was still in there somewhere. Driven by hope and desperation, she felt an urge to step toward him. Before she could move, her father's voice cut through the silence. "Tany, don't move," Damen said, his voice firm but trembling with fear. "It's been 12 years, he may not remember you, and the wild has changed him. Please don't make a sudden move." But Tany couldn't let go of the bond they once shared. Memories flooded back. Jalta catching her when she stumbled, wrapping her in his arms, looking at her with total trust. The way only someone who truly loves you can. She refused to believe all of that was gone, buried under 12 years of wildness and survival. "Dad, it's Jalta," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I know it's him, and I know he remembers me." Still, doubt crept in. What if she was wrong? What if Jalta no longer saw her as the child he once protected, but as just another intruder? The danger was real. One wrong move could be fatal. But the thought of leaving without knowing the truth was unbearable. She hadn't come this far just to walk away. To understand how she'd ended up here, staring down a wild gorilla twice her size, you have to go back to the very beginning. Tany Aspinall had grown up at a wild animal park in England where her father, the conservationist Damen Aspinall, nurtured her love for animals from the time she could walk. By her first birthday, she had already met Jalta and Bims, two young gorillas who quickly grew attached to her. Long before she could form a full sentence, she was crawling among them, laughing as they gently guided her hands away from danger. They treated her with a gentleness and protectiveness rare in the wild, and they became her first true friends, long before she had any human ones her own age. When Tany turned 12, her father sent her to live with her aunt for school, partly for her education, and partly because Jalta and Bims were being prepared for release into the wild. Knowing how deeply attached his daughter was to the two gorillas, Damen made the decision without telling her in advance, afraid of how she'd react. He tracked their progress from afar and watched them thrive in their natural habitat. But the separation was almost unbearable for Tany. She understood her father's reasoning, but understanding didn't make the loss any easier. She begged to visit them, but Damen always said they needed more time to adjust to a life without human contact. Years passed, and still she never forgot Jalta and Bims, their faces returning to her in quiet moments, in dreams, in the ache of missing something she couldn't quite explain to anyone else. After finishing school and beginning to work alongside her father in conservation, she quietly saved money and eventually found a guide willing to help her track the gorillas down. Damen was hesitant at first, terrified of what could go wrong. But in time, he came to support his daughter's quest to find her old friends again, even knowing the risk it carried. Now standing face to face with a full-grown, seemingly hostile gorilla, Tany faced the moment she'd waited 12 years for. Driven by a bond she refused to believe was broken, she took one bold step forward and softly called out his name, Jalta. The jungle held its breath, and so did everyone watching. In a daring, instinctive move, Tany bared her teeth and growled gently, the same playful gesture from their childhood. The forest fell utterly silent. Everyone waited. Slowly, Jalta's fierce expression began to soften. Recognition flickered in his eyes, bridging 12 years of separation in a single moment. Tany, eyes brimming with tears, carefully placed her hands on his powerful arms. "It's me, Jalta," she whispered, smiling through her fear. Jalta answered with a low, familiar growl, the exact same sound she remembered from childhood, unchanged after 12 long years apart. Overwhelmed, Tany wrapped her arms around the massive gorilla, feeling his heartbeat against her own. Damen, frozen with fear only moments before, cautiously stepped forward. Seeing Jalta's calm response, he too joined the embrace, tears welling in his eyes. This was the culmination of Tany's 12-year journey, a journey built on hope, patience, and a bond that refused to fade, no matter how much time or distance had come between them. As the moment settled, another gorilla emerged from the trees. It was Bims, now a protective father, his young son close at his side. The years had changed all of them, but the bond forged so long ago remained unbroken. Tany watched in awe as Bims approached, his eyes fixed on her with the same fatherly protectiveness that had once shielded her, now guarding his own child instead. This was a new chapter in a story that had already spanned a lifetime. Overwhelmed with emotion, Tany realized Bims was introducing her to his family, a family that never would have existed if not for the freedom he'd been given all those years ago. She knelt slowly and extended her hand toward the curious young gorilla. "Hello there," she whispered softly. After a moment's hesitation, the little one wrapped his fingers around hers, quietly bridging past and present. As the young gorilla grew bolder, tugging playfully at her hair, Tany laughed, recognizing the same mischief Bims once had at that age. Bims watched the exchange, then placed a reassuring hand on Tany's shoulder, a quiet gesture of trust and acceptance. This reunion was proof that some bonds don't fade with time or distance. Though she was no longer the little girl who once played among gorillas, Tany remained connected to them in a way words could barely capture. As the day drew to a close, the gorillas gathered around to share Tany's snacks, sitting together as if no time had passed at all. Before Jalta and Bims walked the group to the edge of their territory, she had no way of knowing if she'd see them again. The wild had reclaimed them, and it would decide when, or if, their paths would cross once more. But Tany made a quiet promise to herself, to keep working alongside her father, protecting these extraordinary animals and the families they were building in the wild, they now called home. It's a story that raises a question worth sitting with. Was Tany right to risk everything for one more moment with an old friend? Or was the danger too great a price for one reunion? Let us know in the comments what you would have done in her place.